Shadows and solitude. The cell was Amanda Rivers' reality, a confining square of concrete and steel walls that seemed to close in with each passing hour. The silence here was thick and weighty, broken only by the distant echoes of inmates' footsteps and the jangle of keys from the guards who patrolled with faces as blank as the walls. It was the kind of quiet that drives one inward, and Amanda spent countless hours reflecting on the steps that had brought her to this point. She had been here for almost 2 years, accused and convicted of a crime she knew in her heart she hadn't committed, and every day since the trial, she tried to make sense of the nightmare that had torn her life apart. Amanda's days had turned into a repetitive, almost meditative cycle. She would wake up, trace the marks she had scratched into the wall, one for every day that passed, and try to focus on memories of her daughter, Emily. Memories of Emily felt like small pockets of light, a kind of solace in the dark. But her mind wouldn't let her linger long on the happiness they once shared. Thoughts of the trial, the accusations, and the overwhelming public hatred would force their way in, tainting her memories of joy with bitterness and fear. The crime Amanda was accused of was nothing short of monstrous. Judge Samuel Turner's daughter, Olivia, had vanished without a trace, and Emily, Amanda's own daughter, had also been taken away that same day. It seemed everyone was certain of Amanda's guilt from the start, despite her insistence of innocence. The evidence against her had seemed solid, at least on the surface. Tire tracks near the crime scene, items she was said to have handled, and a single witness placing her near the judge's home that evening had been enough for the public and courtroom alike to condemn her. The judge himself, powerful and well-connected, had stood in court, his presence imposing and his pain palpable as he spoke of the tragedy. He was Olivia's father, after all, and his testimony was enough to sway even the most skeptical. His words echoed in Amanda's mind daily. She was innocent. My daughter did not deserve this. And neither does my family. Amanda had watched him while he spoke, her heart aching with despair, knowing no one would believe her side. She was painted as a ruthless woman, a monster hiding behind the guise of a mother, and once the media picked up that narrative, it seemed she was doomed. Amanda's lawyer, Mark Williams, had fought for her with a passion she hadn't expected. He was a younger lawyer, idealistic and determined, and he had seen something in Amanda that kept him going even when things seemed hopeless. He believed her, truly and deeply, and had worked tirelessly, sifting through evidence and urging Amanda to speak up and defend herself. "Amanda, I know there's something you're not telling me," he would say during their visits. But she had been quiet, lost in her own thoughts, her voice often silenced by the weight of despair and the fear of causing even more harm. She had, after all, seen the power Judge Turner wielded. One cold, rainy afternoon, everything changed. She had been expecting another dull, lonely day in her cell, but she was jolted by the loud clank of the door and the sudden appearance of a figure she hadn't seen since her sentencing. It was Judge Turner himself, and his presence cast a dark shadow across her confined space. Amanda's heart raced as he stepped in, the thick tension between them as oppressive as the walls around her. Turner's face was a mask of controlled fury, his eyes cold and unrelenting as they bore down on her. He towered over her, a man accustomed to being feared, and his voice was barely more than a bitter whisper as he spoke. "I wanted to see you, Amanda," he said, the words carrying the weight of barely contained rage. "I wanted to see the face of the woman who took everything from me, who stole the light from my life." Amanda sat in silence, her body tense, every instinct screaming to look away. But she forced herself to meet his gaze. Despite the torrent of emotions swelling within her, she would not let him see her break. "You may sit here," he continued, venom in every word, silent and unrepentant. "But I will have my justice, Amanda. I want you to know that the moment you leave this world, my daughter's spirit will finally rest." Amanda swallowed, her throat dry, and 1,000 words rose to her lips. But she forced herself to remain silent. She knew that any response might set him off further. Besides, What could she say to this man who had already made up his mind about her? She'd already tried to tell the truth, and no one had listened. Then, as he continued to rant, something inside her shifted. His words, cruel and cutting, made her mind drift back to the day her world had fallen apart. It wasn't something she had often revisited, but in that moment, with Turner's anger filling the room, a small memory surfaced. A fragment of a conversation she'd overheard, a detail she'd missed in her terror and confusion. She remembered someone, perhaps a stranger's voice on the street, mentioning Judge Turner's family's old property, a farm where few people visited. It seemed odd at the time, but she'd been too wrapped up in her own turmoil to consider it. Suddenly, a realization gripped her. What if that farm held answers? What if it was the place where Emily and Olivia had been taken? It was a sliver of a thought, a vague impression, but it was enough to light a spark in her, something close to hope. Amanda looked up at Judge Turner, her gaze steady now, a newfound strength rising within her. "You're wrong," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "I didn't take Olivia. And Emily, I think she's still out there. I think I know where she is." Turner's expression changed. For a moment, he looked taken aback, but his face quickly twisted into one of contempt. "This is just another one of your sick lies," he snarled, "trying to buy yourself time with more manipulations." But Amanda held his gaze. She could feel the conviction solidifying within her, her body alive with urgency. "Check your family's farm," she said, her voice almost pleading. "Go there. See for yourself." The judge stared at her, his face a mixture of anger and something else. Doubt, perhaps. But he quickly masked it, turning away with a dismissive gesture. "You've run out of chances, Amanda," he said, his voice cold and final. "This is the end." Amanda's heart pounded as he left the cell, the door slamming shut behind him. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, she felt a faint glimmer of hope. She knew that her words might not be enough to sway him, but maybe, just maybe, she had planted a seed of doubt. And if that small doubt led someone, anyone, to investigate, there might still be hope for her and her daughter. As Amanda sat back on the cold, hard floor of her cell, her thoughts turned to Emily, the daughter she hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. She closed her eyes, holding onto the image of Emily's smile, her laughter, her wide-eyed curiosity about the world. She didn't know if her words would make any difference, but she was willing to fight with whatever strength she had left. The next morning, a strange quiet settled over the prison. Guards moved past her cell, their eyes averted, their movements more deliberate than usual. Amanda sensed something had shifted. She had no way of knowing if anyone had acted on her words, but she clung to that hope, praying that someone would see through the lies before it was too late. Little did she know that outside these walls, a storm was beginning to brew, one that would shake the foundation of everything the world thought it knew about this case, and about the woman they had so easily condemned. Seeds of doubt. The morning after her desperate plea to Judge Turner, Amanda sat in her cell, nerves frayed and senses heightened. Every distant footstep, every murmur from the guards in the hallway felt charged with the weight of a world that seemed to be shifting, even if she couldn't see it. Hope was a fragile thing here, something Amanda had learned to guard as carefully as a flame in the wind, for every attempt she made to defend herself had been met with contempt, disbelief, or outright scorn. But now, after yesterday's confrontation, she could feel something brewing in the air, though she didn't dare speak of it, even to herself. That morning, just after breakfast was pushed through the narrow slot in her cell door, Amanda noticed something strange. Usually, the guards barely looked at her, moving with mechanical efficiency. Today, however, their glances lingered, their eyes shadowed with something more complex than the usual disdain. Whispers trailed after them as they passed her cell, words she couldn't quite catch. Her pulse quickened. Did it mean something? Could her plea have reached someone's ears, even if Judge Turner himself dismissed it? Meanwhile, far beyond the cold confines of Amanda's prison cell, her lawyer, Mark Williams, was dealing with his own internal turmoil. Since the trial's conclusion, He had been unable to shake the feeling that Amanda was hiding a crucial piece of the puzzle, one that would finally reveal the truth. Every visit, every meeting, he had tried to press her, convinced she was holding back for reasons he couldn't fathom. He'd been her last ally, and he had fought tirelessly, even as public opinion turned against her. Mark knew better than most people that public sentiment could often be swayed by sensationalized headlines, and this case had been no exception. After Amanda's conviction, Mark had refused to let the case go. He pored over transcripts, scrutinized the evidence, and questioned the witnesses. In his heart, he couldn't reconcile the Amanda he'd come to know. A fierce, loving mother, with the monstrous image painted by the prosecution. But without new evidence, his hands were tied. All he could do was wait for the appeal process to bring her some small measure of relief. However, the message he received that morning changed everything. The phone on his desk rang shortly after he'd settled in, a call from a fellow attorney he'd once considered a friendly rival. With little preamble, his colleague launched into the news. "Turner's been seen entering the prison," he said, his tone sharp and intrigued. "Rumor has it he went to confront Amanda himself." The voice lowered to a near whisper. Apparently, she told him something that got him riled up enough to storm out of there like a man possessed. Mark sat bolt upright, his mind racing. Amanda rarely spoke in her own defense, let alone raised her voice in protest. The fact that she'd said something that had gotten under the judge's skin was no small detail. He ended the call with a quick thanks, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Without hesitating, he grabbed his coat, abandoning his morning's work as he made his way to the prison. Whatever had passed between Amanda and Turner, he needed to know. If Amanda had finally shared something, even a small piece of information, he was going to get it from her. The hours crawled by in her cell, and Amanda's patience began to waver. She'd given everything she had in that brief exchange with Turner, but without any way to confirm whether it had made a difference. She was left adrift, relying on sheer willpower to keep herself together. And then, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across her cell, a guard appeared at her door. Without a word, he gestured for her to stand, his expression unreadable. Amanda's heart hammered in her chest as she stood, feeling the weight of both dread and anticipation settling over her. It wasn't execution day. Not yet. So why were they taking her somewhere now? Her mind raced with questions as she followed the guard, her shackled footsteps echoing down the hall. He led her to the visitation room, a sterile, cold space with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Seated at the table was Mark, his face set in a mask of determination. When he saw her, his expression softened, relief and concern mingling in his gaze. He gestured for her to sit across from him, and the guard stepped back, giving them the smallest modicum of privacy. "Amanda," Mark began, his voice low, "I heard about Turner's visit. What did you say to him?" She looked at him, taking in his familiar face, the face of the one person who had stood by her side, even when everyone else had abandoned her. She took a steadying breath, choosing her words carefully. "I told him about a memory, something I'd overheard," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I remembered hearing someone mention a farm, his family's farm. I think Emily might be there. I think that's where he's hiding her." Mark's brow furrowed, his eyes intense as he processed her words. "You're saying you believe Turner could have had something to do with Emily's disappearance? That he might be hiding her?" Amanda nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settling over her. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, the first time she'd let herself even consider the possibility. "It's just a feeling," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "But it's a feeling I can't ignore, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it." Mark's expression hardened with resolve. "This changes everything," he said, his voice low but fierce. "If there's a chance that your daughter is alive, and that Turner had a role in all of this, we can't waste another moment." But Amanda could see the doubt in his eyes, the cautious skepticism that lingered even in the face of her desperate conviction. She understood. After all, She was asking him to believe something that seemed impossible. Judge Turner was a respected man, a figure of authority with a spotless record. The idea that he could be involved in something so heinous was a stretch even for her. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mark didn't hesitate. "I'm going to file a motion," he said, his eyes sharp with purpose. "I'll petition the court to issue a search warrant for Turner's family property. If there's even the slightest chance that Emily is there, we need to act now." Amanda felt a surge of gratitude and hope, mingled with a simmering fear that gnawed at her. She knew the odds they were facing, knew the influence Turner held over the people who would decide her fate. But seeing Mark's determination gave her strength. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was out there who believed in her enough to make a difference. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mark threw himself into the motion, drafting a compelling argument that called into question Turner's behavior, his sudden and uncharacteristic hostility towards Amanda, and the slim but undeniable possibility that Emily and Olivia might have been hidden away on the farm. The judge overseeing the case was known to be strict and by the book, which made Mark's task even more challenging. But he was relentless, pulling late nights and digging up anything he could use to strengthen Amanda's case. Meanwhile, Amanda found herself in a strange kind of limbo, each day a test of endurance as she waited for news. She would sit in her cell, trying to piece together any scraps of information she could remember, anything that might add weight to her claims. As she scratched another mark into the wall, her thoughts drifted back to the days before her arrest, to the last day she had seen Emily. She remembered the look of fear in her daughter's eyes, the helplessness that had gripped her as she watched her child being taken away. In the stillness of her cell, Amanda allowed herself to replay that memory, hoping that somewhere in the details lay the answer she needed. She closed her eyes, conjuring up the image of Emily's face, her bright eyes wide with confusion and fear. The memory was painful, but it was all she had left of her daughter, and she clung to it as if it were a lifeline. 3 days after Mark's visit, the news Amanda had been waiting for finally arrived. The judge had granted a preliminary investigation, a search of Turner's family property. It was a long shot, but it was something. A small victory in a battle that had seemed hopeless. When Mark relayed the news to her in another tense visit, Amanda felt a surge of emotion so overwhelming, she had to bite her lip to keep from breaking down in front of him. She nodded, barely able to speak, but the look in her eyes was one of fierce determination. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "You got them to listen." Mark reached across the table, his hand resting on hers in a gesture of quiet solidarity. "We're not there yet," he said gently, "but we're closer than we've ever been. And I promise, Amanda, I'm not stopping until we find Emily." For the first time in 2 years, Amanda allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a future where Emily was safe, where the truth had finally been revealed, and where she might one day walk free. She didn't know if this small step would lead to freedom, or even if Emily was truly still alive, but for the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. That night, as she lay on her thin mattress staring up at the ceiling, Amanda whispered a silent prayer to whatever forces might be listening. She prayed for strength, for courage, and most of all, for her daughter's safety. And as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with images of light, of open fields, and the sound of Emily's laughter echoing in the distance. Little did Amanda know that the investigation was already underway, and with it, secrets long buried were about to surface, shattering the carefully constructed facade of a powerful man, and forever altering the course of her life. The unearthed truth. Amanda awoke to a sharp knock on her cell door, her heart leaping as she sat up. The air was thick with tension, and she instinctively knew that something had happened. She could see it in the guard's face as he unlocked her cell, a strange expression caught between curiosity and something almost like fear. Amanda's hands trembled slightly as she stood up, the shackles on her ankles clinking as she walked toward the door. The guard spoke, his voice low. "Your lawyer's here, Amanda." Amanda's heart raced as she followed him down the corridor, her mind racing with questions and worries. Mark would only be here if there was news. But what kind of news? Had the investigation turned up anything? She'd spent every minute since the hearing imagining 1,000 scenarios, clinging to the slim hope that the search would finally reveal the truth. But her fears gnawed at her. The nagging possibility that her plea had fallen on deaf ears, or worse, had only served to enrage Judge Turner further. In the small, sterile visitation room, Mark was already seated, his face set in a grim expression. He rose to greet her, his movements slower than usual, as if he were weighed down by something he couldn't shake. Amanda's stomach twisted at the sight. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes speaking volumes about sleepless nights and restless days. Amanda sat across from him, the silence stretching taut between them. "Mark," she finally whispered, her voice wavering. "What happened? Did they find anything?" He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together, his gaze piercing as he searched her face. "Amanda," he began, his tone steady, but edged with a tension she'd rarely heard from him. "The investigators followed through on the warrant. They searched the farm, just like you said." Amanda's breath caught, her heart hammering in her chest as she waited for him to continue. Every second felt stretched to eternity as she held his gaze, desperately seeking any hint of what he was about to say. "They found Olivia and Emily," he continued, his voice barely more than a whisper. "They were alive, Amanda, hidden away in a concealed room on the property." A rush of emotions crashed over Amanda like a tidal wave. Relief, disbelief, and pure, overwhelming joy mixed with fury. She fought to keep her composure, feeling tears prick at her eyes as her mind raced to process the news. "Emily, she's safe?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion, hardly able to believe the words. Mark nodded, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Yes, Amanda. They're both safe. They're being taken to a hospital for evaluation, but from what I've been told, they seem unharmed." Amanda's hands covered her mouth as she closed her eyes, relief flooding her. Emily was safe. After all these agonizing months, her daughter was alive. The thought was almost too much to bear, the sheer weight of it overwhelming her. She felt as though she could finally breathe, as if the air in her lungs had been freed from years of suffocating fear and sorrow. But Mark wasn't done. He leaned closer, his expression hardening as he spoke, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's more, Amanda. They didn't just find Emily and Olivia. They found evidence, clear evidence, that Judge Turner had orchestrated the entire thing." Amanda's eyes snapped open, her gaze meeting his in shock. "Turner? But why? Why would he do this?" Mark's jaw clenched, his face a mixture of disgust and anger. It turns out that Turner had been dealing with some financial troubles. He was on the verge of losing everything, and he saw an opportunity. By orchestrating Olivia's disappearance and framing you for it, he could manipulate public opinion and position himself as a sympathetic figure, a grieving father. Not only would he keep his reputation intact, but he'd also receive a significant sum of money from a substantial life insurance policy he'd taken out on Olivia. And he knew that someone with your background, a single mother with a history of financial strain, would make for the perfect scapegoat. Amanda's mind reeled at the revelation, the depth of Turner's manipulation sinking in. She'd known he was capable of cruelty, but to exploit his own daughter's life, to manipulate the system and destroy another person's world for his own gain, it was monstrous. Mark continued, his voice steady, though his expression was pained. The grandparents admitted to being coerced. They were terrified. Amanda. Turner threatened them, told them that if they ever spoke a word, they'd suffer consequences. They felt they had no choice but to hide the girls and stay silent. They're broken up about it, Amanda. Truly broken. Amanda could only sit in silence, the enormity of what had happened washing over her. Turner, the man who had stood in court and accused her with such fury, who had painted her as a monster, had been hiding his own twisted secrets all along. And the public, the jury, everyone had believed him. No one had stopped to question the story, to look beyond the facade he'd crafted. The depth of his betrayal, the coldness of his actions, left her sick to her stomach. Finally, she looked up, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What happens now?" Mark's expression softened, a flicker of reassurance in his gaze. "Judge Turner has been taken into custody. He's being charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice, among other charges. There will be a full trial, and the evidence against him is damning. As for you, Amanda, I filed a motion to overturn your conviction. It's only a matter of time now." The words "overturn your conviction" echoed in Amanda's mind, their meaning sinking in slowly, as if her mind couldn't quite comprehend the possibility. She had lived in this prison, in this nightmare, for so long that freedom felt like a distant concept, something she dared not hope for. But now, that hope was real. She could feel it, taste it. When will I be able to see Emily?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Mark's gaze softened, understanding the desperation in her eyes. "Soon, Amanda. Very soon. The doctors want to make sure she's okay, physically and mentally, before they let anyone see her. But she's asking for you. She hasn't stopped asking for you." Amanda swallowed back a sob, her heart breaking with both joy and sorrow. The thought of her daughter, her precious Emily, enduring so much fear and confusion, filled her with a mix of guilt and relief. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. The rest, they could rebuild. As Mark wrapped up their meeting, promising to keep her updated with every new development, Amanda felt a new resolve solidifying within her. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom anymore. She was fighting for Emily, for justice, and for all the days they'd lost together because of one man's greed and deceit. The news of Judge Turner's arrest and the discovery of the girl spread like wildfire. Public opinion, once firmly against Amanda, shifted in the opposite direction as the horrifying details of Turner's scheme emerged. News outlets covered every detail, from the judge's desperate attempts to maintain his reputation to the heartbreaking stories of the girl's time in hiding. Turner's fall from grace was swift and brutal, and the once respected judge became a figure of public revulsion, his name now synonymous with betrayal and corruption. Amanda's name, once dragged through the mud, was finally being cleared. The media, the same entities that had once vilified her, now scrambled to highlight her story, painting her as a survivor, a mother who had endured unimaginable hardship. Journalists clamored for statements, eager to capture every new twist and turn in the case, but Amanda remained silent, focusing her energy on one thing: reuniting with her daughter. As she awaited her final hearing, the hearing that would officially overturn her conviction, Amanda found herself in a strange state of limbo. She was still confined within the prison walls, but for the first time in years, the future seemed bright. She would lie awake at night, imagining the life she and Emily would rebuild together, the places they would visit, the moments they would share. The day of her hearing arrived, and Amanda was led into the courtroom, a room that had once felt suffocating, but now held a promise of freedom. The room was filled with journalists, spectators, and officials, their eyes trained on her as she took her seat beside Mark. She barely noticed them, her attention focused on the judge who would decide her fate. The proceedings were swift. With the overwhelming evidence in her favor, there was little to contest. The judge, a man known for his strict adherence to justice, read out the decision with a solemn expression. The court finds that Ms. Amanda Rivers was wrongfully convicted of the charges against her. Her conviction is hereby overturned, and she is to be released immediately. A wave of relief swept over her, the words "wrongfully convicted" echoing in her mind, a validation of everything she had endured. She glanced at Mark, who gave her a reassuring nod, his own relief evident in the small smile that broke across his face. As Amanda stood to leave the courtroom, reporters surged forward, shouting questions, their cameras flashing in a frenzy. She paused, glancing at the sea of faces, and for a brief moment, she considered saying something, acknowledging the injustice she had endured. But then she thought of Emily, of the life they would soon be rebuilding, and decided that her words were better saved for her daughter. With her head held high, Amanda walked out of the courthouse, each step bringing her closer to the freedom she had fought so hard for. The sunlight hit her face as she emerged onto the courthouse steps, a warm embrace after years in the cold shadows. She felt the fresh air fill her lungs, the first breath of freedom she tasted in what felt like a lifetime. The crowd watched as Amanda stood there, free at last, her expression calm and resolute. She was no longer a prisoner, no longer the accused. She was a mother, a survivor, and a woman who had faced unimaginable trials and emerged stronger. And as she left the courthouse, Amanda knew that her journey wasn't over. There was still healing to be done, justice to be served, and a life to rebuild. But she would face it all, with courage and an unbreakable spirit, for herself, for Emily, and for the countless others who had stood by her side, believing in her innocence when no one else would. Rising shadows and unraveling truths. Amanda's newfound hope simmered within her as she clutched the slim envelope Mark had slipped her during his last visit. Inside there was a simple note with 2 words. "It's happening." Mark had assured her the search was underway at Judge Turner's family property. For the first time, she felt that her words might finally be reaching the right ears, that someone might actually take them seriously. She whispered a silent prayer that the truth, her truth, would finally be brought to light. But as Amanda awaited word of the investigation, she sensed something else brewing. That sense of possibility had settled over the prison like an uneasy fog, and she noticed a change in the atmosphere. Guards, who once had ignored her entirely, would glance her way as they walked by her cell, their eyes full of something unspoken, perhaps curiosity or suspicion. Inmates whispered as she passed, some of them eyeing her with newfound respect, others with wariness, as though she held a strange power over their ordinary world. The rumors in the prison spread like wildfire. Some murmured that the infamous Judge Turner, once feared and revered, was somehow under investigation himself. Others speculated wildly that she might go free. Amanda heard it all through the thin walls of her cell, her mind clinging to each whisper like a lifeline. She knew her entire world rested on the outcome of that investigation, and each tick of the clock made her feel the weight of every second that passed. Meanwhile, Mark was facing his own battles. The search warrant had been a success, but it was just the first hurdle. As investigators descended on the Turner family property, Mark had accompanied them, determined to ensure that no stone was left unturned. He wanted to witness every second, to document every finding, for he knew how easily evidence could be buried, especially by those with the kind of influence Judge Turner wielded. The Turner farm, with its vast stretches of open fields and a cluster of aging barns, was a quiet, secluded place nestled on the outskirts of the county. It was the perfect place for secrets to remain hidden, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling of eerie stillness as they began their search. He had read Amanda's description of the property thoroughly, her recollection of the landmarks, the barn with faded red paint, the old farmhouse with the ivy-covered walls. He realized that, despite everything she'd endured, her memory was precise. It was a detail that sent a chill through him. This was a woman who had nothing left to lose, who had spent countless hours replaying every detail in her mind, desperate for justice. As the team spread out, combing through the barn and nearby outbuildings, Mark felt his heart pound. He stood near the team's lead detective, Harris, who'd been skeptical about the case from the start. Harris was a veteran, known for his no-nonsense approach and his skepticism of high-profile cases that didn't add up. And Mark knew that if anyone could uncover the truth, it was this man. The team's movements were meticulous, but hours passed without finding anything more than abandoned farm equipment, empty stalls, and dust-covered furniture. Just when the doubt started to gnaw at Mark's confidence, a member of the team stumbled upon a small locked cellar door at the far end of the main barn. The team fell silent, every eye on the detective, as he motioned for the lock to be broken. With a shattering snap, the cellar door swung open, revealing a staircase leading down into the darkness. Mark's breath caught as they descended, flashlights illuminating the cold, damp walls of the cellar. The silence was suffocating, punctuated only by the creak of each step and the faint dripping of water somewhere in the distance. As they reached the bottom, the beam of the flashlight fell on a small room lined with the remnants of what seemed to be hurriedly removed bedding and toys. And then, at the far end, a hidden door, almost imperceptible, disguised within the wall itself. Harris moved cautiously, pressing against the wall until the door clicked open, revealing a small, hidden room where two figures sat, huddled together. Olivia and Emily. Mark's heart leaped, a flood of relief and rage washing over him as he saw them there, disheveled but alive. The girls were frightened, their eyes wide as they looked up, not comprehending at first that their ordeal was finally over. Back in her cell, Amanda paced, every nerve frayed and raw, when a guard appeared and opened her door, calling her name. "Amanda Rivers, come with me." Her mind raced as she followed the guard, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. She was led not to the visitation room, but instead to a small office, where the warden himself sat waiting. He looked at her, his face a mask of unreadable emotion, before gesturing for her to sit. "Amanda," he began, his voice steady but serious, "we have some news. It's about your daughter, and Olivia Turner." Amanda's entire body froze, her breath caught in her throat. She barely heard his words, only that they had been found, alive. Her mind reeled, relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. She was going to see Emily again. Her daughter was safe. The warden continued, explaining the next steps. "Judge Turner has been detained," he said, his voice taut. "With the evidence found, he's being held on charges that include conspiracy, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice." Amanda could hardly believe her ears. The powerful man who had condemned her, painted her as a monster, was finally going to face his own crimes. Her mind raced with questions, and a strange sensation crept over her, a mix of satisfaction and horror. Satisfaction that justice was being served, but horror at the lengths Turner had gone to cover his tracks, even involving his own family. She shuddered, thinking of her precious Emily and the terror she must have endured. The warden's voice softened. "I want you to know that arrangements are being made for you to see Emily, but there will be a brief period of evaluation and recovery. She and Olivia both have been through a great deal." Amanda's relief was tempered by a sobering truth. Emily had suffered, and it would be a long road to recovery for both of them. She knew they would need each other, but the guilt gnawed at her. She had been powerless to save her daughter. But as that shame surfaced, she reminded herself that she had fought. She had done everything she could. And now, by some miracle, they had both survived. As Amanda was led back to her cell, she felt an eerie calm settle over her. Though her mind was still racing with emotions, the prison, which had once seemed an unbreakable barrier, now felt like a temporary cage, one she would soon be free of. She could see a glimmer of freedom on the horizon, though she knew it would come with its own challenges. Back at the Turner family farm, Mark and Detective Harris were piecing together the implications of the hidden room. As Olivia and Emily were escorted to safety, a forensic team moved in, combing through every inch of the cellar. They uncovered chilling traces, documents, photographs, and a series of financial records that indicated Turner's growing desperation. He had been on the brink of ruin, his reputation at risk, and he'd devised a plan to regain control, even if it meant sacrificing those closest to him. But the real shock came when Harris found a series of falsified documents that pointed to Turner's broader plan. He hadn't just intended to frame Amanda. He had carefully orchestrated a narrative to make her look guilty from the start. There were falsified financial reports, anonymous tips he'd filed himself, and a timeline he had carefully crafted to make her appear at the scene. Harris's respect for the law had been unshakable, But now he was forced to confront the reality that one of his own had exploited the system, perverting justice for personal gain. It was a realization that left him shaken, determined to make things right. News of the investigation spread, and within days, Amanda's case reached the national media. Journalists dug into every detail, retracing the sensational trial that had condemned an innocent woman while allowing a guilty man to walk free. Public outrage mounted, people calling for a complete review of Amanda's case and sweeping reforms to prevent such corruption from happening again. The sympathy that had once been so firmly on Turner's side shifted entirely to Amanda as more details of his crimes came to light. He was a man who had hidden behind his position, manipulating people and circumstances with ruthless precision, and the public was now demanding justice. Mark continued to fight for Amanda, filing an emergency motion to overturn her conviction. The courts responded swiftly, and a hearing was scheduled within days. On the morning of her hearing, Amanda sat beside Mark, who held her hand briefly before the judge entered, a silent gesture of support that meant the world to her. She was exhausted, her mind and heart raw from the ordeal, but she was ready to face the courtroom once more. This time, however, she was here as the wronged party, not the accused. As the judge read the decision, declaring Amanda's innocence and overturning her conviction, a murmur of relief rippled through the courtroom. The injustice that had held her captive for so long was finally acknowledged, and she was free. Amanda left the courthouse to a flood of cameras and reporters, questions flying at her from every direction, but she said nothing. Her mind was already on her daughter, her heart racing with the anticipation of their reunion. The day Amanda reunited with Emily was one she would remember forever. She walked into the hospital room, her steps slow and hesitant, and there, sitting on the bed, was her daughter. Emily looked up, her face a mixture of fear and wonder as recognition dawned in her eyes. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Amanda dropped to her knees, her arms outstretched. "Yes, sweetheart. It's me. Mommy's here." Emily ran to her, and Amanda caught her in a tight embrace, feeling the warmth and weight of her daughter for the first time in years. Tears streamed down her face as she held her daughter close, whispering words of comfort and love, promising that they would never be separated again. For Amanda and Emily, the journey was far from over. There would be healing, therapy, and the slow process of rebuilding a life that had been shattered. But they had each other, and that was enough. Together, they would face the future, one step at a time. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Amanda looked forward to what lay ahead, filled with hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. A world reclaimed. Amanda's first night of freedom was spent in a quiet hotel room, far from the sterile walls and ceaseless vigilance of prison guards. The room was small but luxurious to her senses, the simple warmth of soft bedding, the scent of fresh linens, and the gentle hum of city sounds drifting through the window. It was all new, overwhelming, and yet deeply comforting. Every sensation, every mundane detail felt heightened, reminding her of the long months when she had only concrete walls and fleeting moments of sunlight through barred windows. She hardly slept. Her mind was too full of thoughts about Emily, about the trials they had both endured, and about the unknown future that now stretched before them. So much had been stolen, so many moments they would never get back. But she knew that dwelling on the past wouldn't serve either of them. Emily needed her to be strong, present, and fully committed to building a new life together. This was the second chance Amanda had never dared to imagine, and she was determined to make it matter. The next morning, Amanda met with Mark, who had arranged for her to see Emily again, this time not under the clinical watch of doctors, but in a space meant to nurture healing. Mark was exhausted, lines of worry still etched into his face, yet he seemed lighter, the weight of Amanda's case no longer pressing on his shoulders. He greeted her with a warm smile, an unspoken sense of pride and relief in his expression. "Are you ready?" he asked gently as they walked toward the family center, where Emily was being temporarily cared for while they both transitioned. Amanda nodded, but her heart was pounding. She was stepping into a world that felt entirely foreign, one where she was free but responsible for rebuilding everything she had lost. It wasn't just about her now. Emily was fragile, vulnerable, and the trauma of her time in hiding would require careful, thoughtful support. Amanda knew that the path forward was full of unknowns, but she felt an overwhelming gratitude for the chance to travel it. As they entered the center, Amanda took in the colorful decorations, the children's artwork on the walls, and the gentle hum of quiet activity. A staff member greeted her, leading her down a hallway to a cozy room furnished with plush chairs, stuffed animals, and gentle lighting. She had only a few minutes to settle her nerves before the door opened. And there was Emily, holding the hand of a social worker, her gaze uncertain. "Mommy." Emily's voice was small, tentative, as though she were testing to see if this was real. Amanda's throat tightened with emotion as she reached out, crouching to Emily's height, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "Mommy's here. And I'm never leaving you again." In a heartbeat, Emily was in her arms, the little girl's fingers clutching Amanda's shoulders as though she would disappear at any moment. Amanda held her tightly, whispering gentle reassurances, feeling her daughter's heartbeat against her chest. It was the first time in years that Amanda felt whole, as though her heart had finally found its way home. For a while, they just sat together, words unneeded as they both took in the reality of being together again. Emily eventually pulled back, her small fingers playing with Amanda's hair, touching her face as if to memorize every detail. There was a maturity in her daughter's eyes that Amanda hadn't seen before, a resilience that seemed far too advanced for her young age. She wondered about the toll the ordeal had taken on her, the strength Emily must have summoned to endure such terrifying circumstances. Emily's voice broke through Amanda's thoughts. "I was scared, Mommy," she whispered. "I didn't know if I'd see you again." Amanda stroked her daughter's hair, feeling the softness of it against her fingers, a detail she'd missed desperately. "I was scared too, Emily," she admitted, her voice filled with raw honesty. "But I never stopped believing that we'd find each other again. I thought about you every single day." Emily nestled closer, her tiny hand gripping Amanda's tightly. "I thought about you too," she murmured. "I just wanted to come home." The days that followed were a delicate dance between new routines and the unearthing of deep-seated trauma. Amanda had rented a small apartment, not far from the outskirts of the city, where she and Emily could find solace away from the prying eyes of the media and the lingering whispers of scandal. The apartment was modest but comfortable, and they spent their first evening unpacking, arranging a few belongings, and making the space feel like home. Amanda put up some drawings Emily had done during her stay at the family center, pinning them on the fridge like badges of survival. She marveled at how quickly Emily seemed to settle in, her resilience both a source of pride and a painful reminder of what she had endured. But beneath the surface, Amanda could see that Emily was struggling. She would wake in the night from nightmares, her small frame trembling as she clung to Amanda, the echoes of her fear still fresh. During the day, she would play, talk, and laugh, but there was a guardedness in her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Amanda understood this all too well. They were both learning how to trust again, to believe in the safety of each new day. Amanda sought out a counselor specializing in trauma for both of them, knowing that healing would require more than just time. They needed a space where they could confront the shadows left by their experiences, somewhere safe to navigate the grief and anger that lingered. The counselor, Dr. Hall, was gentle and patient, guiding Emily and Amanda through sessions that allowed them to process their experiences together and individually. Dr. Hall had a particular warmth that Emily seemed drawn to, and Amanda was grateful for the gentle way she encouraged Emily to talk about her fears. Emily began opening up, sometimes only in fragments, but each piece was a step closer to healing. She spoke of the small, hidden room on Turner's property, of the old toys she'd been given to keep her occupied, and of the long stretches of silence that had filled her days. She was young, but her memory was vivid, and Amanda could feel her heart break as her daughter recounted the loneliness, the confusion, and the constant fear. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Amanda and Emily sat together on the apartment's small balcony, watching the sunset. Emily leaned against Amanda's shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't understand why they took me. I didn't do anything wrong." Amanda held her daughter close, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You didn't, sweetheart. None of this was your fault. There was a very bad man who did this because he was angry and scared. But he can't hurt us anymore. We're safe now." Emily nodded, though Amanda could see the lingering doubt in her eyes. They had both been betrayed by someone in a position of power, and the road to rebuilding that trust was steep. But she was willing to climb it every day if it meant Emily could feel safe again. The world outside their little haven, however, was anything but quiet. The media circus surrounding Judge Turner's case had grown into a national scandal, with reporters scrutinizing every detail of the investigation. As more information surfaced, the public was left horrified by the extent of Turner's deception and manipulation. Once a figure of respect, Turner was now vilified, his image plastered on every news outlet with headlines denouncing his crimes. His trial promised to be a spectacle, a final reckoning for a man who had so callously used his power to destroy lives. For Amanda, the endless coverage was both vindicating and painful. She was grateful that the truth had finally emerged, that the public now saw her for who she was, a mother who had fought to the very end for her daughter. But the headlines also reopened wounds she was trying to heal, forcing her to relive moments she wanted nothing more than to leave behind. Every time she turned on the television, she was bombarded with reminders of the nightmare they'd survived. Mark remained a steadfast ally, handling all interactions with the media on her behalf and ensuring that her story was accurately represented. He had become not just her lawyer but a friend, someone who had seen her at her lowest and had never given up on her. Amanda found strength in his support, knowing she wasn't alone in this battle. With his guidance, she began to use her voice, telling her story not out of vengeance, but as a testament to resilience and justice. Over time, Amanda received numerous invitations from advocacy groups and legal reform organizations who wanted her to speak about her experience. She was hesitant at first, wary of reopening the wounds and exposing Emily to further scrutiny. But eventually she agreed, realizing that her story could make a difference, perhaps even prevent others from enduring a similar injustice. Her first public statement was a carefully chosen interview, one conducted by a journalist who had taken the time to understand her journey and treat it with respect. She spoke of the need for accountability, for a legal system that protects the innocent and holds those in power to the highest standard. She was honest about the pain, the loss, but also about the hope she now clung to, the life she was building with Emily, one day at a time. And as she spoke, she found a surprising sense of peace. By sharing her story, she was reclaiming her narrative, turning her suffering into a tool for change. It was a way of honoring the pain without letting it define her. She would no longer be the Amanda who had been condemned, but the Amanda who had survived, who had fought and endured. As weeks turned into months, Amanda and Emily settled into a rhythm, finding moments of joy in the small, everyday things. They took walks in the park, baked cookies on rainy days, and spent lazy afternoons drawing pictures or reading books. The nightmares lessened, and Emily's laughter grew louder, more frequent, a melody Amanda treasured. Though they both bore scars, they were healing. Slowly, patiently, they were weaving a life built on love, resilience, and the strength they had found in each other. Their story was far from over, but for the first time, Amanda felt that they were writing it together, no longer at the mercy of others. And as she watched Emily chase butterflies in the park, her laughter ringing out in the afternoon air, Amanda knew that they had reclaimed their world. They had been to the edge of despair, but they had returned, stronger and more determined than ever to embrace the future. Their journey was one of resilience, a testament to the power of hope, and an enduring reminder that, even in the darkest of times, Love could light the way forward. Justice, strength, and new beginnings. Months had passed since Amanda's release and her reunion with Emily, yet every day brought fresh reminders of the ordeal they had endured and the strength they had found within themselves to survive it. Life, Amanda was beginning to realize, could be a strange, fragile thing, a delicate balance between moments of joy and lingering shadows of past pain. And while she and Emily were slowly piecing together their lives, the world beyond was still reeling from the fallout of Judge Turner's scandal. The nation watched as the judicial system prepared to put a once respected man on trial for the crimes he had committed, a reckoning that promised to shake the foundations of public trust. And though Amanda had tried to shield herself and Emily from the media frenzy, the case was too high profile to escape entirely. Every news channel, every headline seemed to buzz with updates on Judge Turner's upcoming trial, painting him as the epitome of corruption and betrayal. But for Amanda, Judge Turner's trial wasn't about the world's judgment. It was about her own, about finally facing the man who had stolen everything from her and her daughter. She felt a deep, pulsing need for closure, for the acknowledgement of the wrong she had suffered. And so, when the subpoena arrived for her to testify against him, she knew she couldn't refuse. Mark met her early the morning of the trial, and together, they walked into the courthouse that had once been her prison, a place where she had stood convicted of crimes she hadn't committed. This time, however, she wasn't the accused. She was the voice of the truth, a survivor determined to set the record straight. The courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and a throng of onlookers eager for the spectacle. Turner was seated at the defense table, a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, authoritative figure who had so ruthlessly condemned her in the past. Instead, he looked hollow, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes avoiding hers. It was a small, bitter comfort, Amanda thought, to see him brought so low by his own actions. But it wasn't enough. She wanted justice. As the trial commenced, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of Turner's deceit. They described how he had orchestrated Olivia's disappearance, exploiting his daughter's innocence to create a narrative that would absolve him of financial ruin and secure his reputation. They recounted the lengths he had gone to silence those who might stand in his way. The manipulation, the lies, and ultimately, the brutal kidnapping of Amanda's daughter, Emily, as collateral in his twisted scheme. When Amanda was called to the stand, the room fell silent. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, the collective anticipation as she took a steadying breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked to the judge, who nodded for her to begin, and then she turned her gaze to Turner, her voice unwavering as she began her testimony. "Judge Turner took everything from me," she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "He took my freedom, my reputation, and for years, he took my daughter. He built a case against me, painted me as a monster, while he sat there pretending to grieve. But the truth is that he never cared about anyone but himself. He was willing to sacrifice his own daughter and destroy my life just to protect his own secrets." Her words rang out, clear and strong, and for the first time, she felt the courtroom rallying around her. The jurors listened intently, some of them visibly moved by her story, others shaking their heads in disbelief at Turner's audacity. Turner's defense team attempted to discredit her, but Amanda's resilience was unshakable. Every question they threw at her, she met with clarity and poise. Her voice did not falter, her gaze never wavered. This was her truth, her story, and she would not allow it to be twisted again. When her testimony concluded, Amanda stepped down from the stand and returned to her seat beside Mark, her hands trembling only slightly. She had done it. She had faced Turner, spoken her truth, and defended her daughter's honor. Whatever the verdict, she knew that she had found a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. The trial lasted 2 grueling weeks. Every detail of Turner's crimes lay bare before the public. Witnesses came forward, including members of Turner's own family, reluctantly recounting the years of manipulation they had endured. The defense tried to spin a tale of a man driven to desperate measures by financial ruin, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges. As the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a weight seemed to lift from Amanda's shoulders. The man who had robbed her of so much would finally pay for his crimes. She felt a surge of relief mingled with sorrow for the family he had also betrayed. But above all, she felt gratitude for the justice that had been so long denied her. After the trial, Amanda and Mark met in a small cafe just outside the courthouse. Mark ordered coffee, and they sat in silence for a while, each of them processing the enormity of what they had just witnessed. He looked at her, his face full of quiet admiration. "You did it, Amanda," he said softly. "You faced him. And now it's over." She nodded, feeling the words settle into her heart. "It's over," she echoed, the realization sinking in. "But I'm not done, Mark. There are so many people out there who need to be heard, who need someone to fight for them. This fight is just beginning." Mark smiled, nodding in agreement. "I had a feeling you'd say that." In the months that followed, Amanda threw herself into advocacy work, determined to use her experience to bring about change. She spoke at legal conferences, shared her story at forums on criminal justice reform, and worked with organizations dedicated to supporting wrongfully convicted individuals. Her past was painful, but she refused to let it define her. Instead, she used it as fuel to bring awareness to the countless others who had been silenced by corruption and prejudice. Her work took her across the country, where she met others who had suffered injustices, their lives upended by a system that had failed them. Some were mothers like her, parents who had been torn from their children. Others were individuals who had lost years of their lives to wrongful imprisonment. Amanda listened to each story, her heart breaking with empathy, but swelling with determination. Every voice she heard strengthened her resolve to create a world where such injustices would not go unchecked. Emily, too, was blossoming in their new life. Freed from the shadows of her past, she was finally finding a sense of normalcy. She was enrolled in a local school where she quickly made friends, her laughter filling their small apartment with a warmth Amanda cherished. Therapy continued for both of them, each session a step closer to healing, and though the road was long, Amanda could see that they were making progress. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Emily turned to Amanda with a question that caught her off guard. "Mommy, why do you help people who were hurt like us?" Amanda looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with love and pride. "Because I don't want anyone else to go through what we did, sweetheart," she said softly. "We were hurt by someone who thought they could control us, but we're stronger now. And I want other people to know that they can be strong too." Emily nodded thoughtfully, a small smile on her face. "I want to help people too, someday." Amanda hugged her, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You already do, my love. You already do." As years passed, Amanda's influence grew. She became a respected voice in the field of criminal justice reform, her story a powerful example of resilience and advocacy. She collaborated with lawmakers, helped shape policies aimed at preventing wrongful convictions, and became a beacon of hope for families who had been torn apart by injustice. Her work was challenging, often heartbreaking, but it was deeply fulfilling. She was not only helping to create change, but also ensuring that Emily grew up in a world where her mother's fight for justice mattered. Together, they traveled, spoke, and supported others in need, their bond strengthening with each new challenge they faced. Through every hardship and victory, Amanda never forgot the journey that had brought her to this place. She had been to the depths of despair, but she had risen, and with each day, she and Emily continued to build a life filled with love, compassion, and unwavering strength. Their past would always be a part of them, a reminder of the darkness they had survived. But in that past, Amanda saw not only pain but also the incredible power of a mother's love, a force that had carried them through the darkest moments and led them into a future filled with hope. As they stood on the balcony of their new home, looking out over the city that had once been both a prison and a refuge, Amanda held Emily close, their faces turned toward the horizon. They had come a long way, and though they knew that life held no guarantees, they also knew that together they could face anything. The world stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, and for the first time in years, Amanda felt truly free. Legacy of hope. Years passed, weaving a tapestry of resilience and strength into Amanda and Emily's lives. Their journey was one of healing, but also of transformation, as Amanda's painful past gave rise to a legacy far greater than she'd ever imagined. What had started as a mother's desperate fight for her daughter became a beacon for others, a symbol of the strength and hope that could emerge from even the darkest places. Amanda's advocacy work had evolved, reaching beyond courtrooms and conferences. She had co-founded an organization called Voices of the Innocent, dedicated to providing legal support, counseling, and advocacy for individuals and families affected by wrongful convictions. The organization quickly gained traction, fueled by Amanda's story and her unrelenting passion for justice. Her reputation as a woman who had stood against corruption and reclaimed her life brought others into her orbit. Legal experts, social workers, therapists, and even former inmates who shared her vision of a world where justice was truly just. Through her organization, Amanda had helped exonerate dozens of individuals who, like her, had been ensnared by the failures of the legal system. Each case she worked on was deeply personal, a reminder of the price she had paid and the life she had fought to reclaim. Her resilience became a touchstone for the people she represented, and the media began to refer to her as a warrior for the wrongfully convicted. But Amanda never saw herself as a warrior. She was simply a mother who had refused to let injustice have the final word. Emily, now a teenager, was growing into a confident, compassionate young woman. She had inherited her mother's strength and determination, and Amanda was both proud and humbled by the person Emily was becoming. The scars of their past were still there, but they had learned to wear them as badges of survival, as reminders of the bond that had carried them through. Their relationship was one of honesty, mutual support, and a fierce love that had been forged in hardship. One crisp autumn morning, Amanda and Emily prepared for a special event, the unveiling of the Voices of the Innocent headquarters, a milestone Amanda had dreamed of for years. The organization had grown rapidly, fueled by donations, partnerships, and a groundswell of public support. They had secured a building in the heart of the city, transforming it into a sanctuary for families like theirs, a place where people could come to find solace, guidance, and hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a highly anticipated event. The media, supporters, former clients, and even some of Amanda's own family were in attendance, eager to witness this new chapter in her journey. As Amanda stood at the podium, her gaze traveled over the crowd, landing on Emily, who was standing among friends and staff members, her face alight with pride. Amanda cleared her throat, a familiar warmth settling over her as she addressed the audience. "Today isn't just about a building or an organization," she began, her voice steady and heartfelt. "Today is about the lives we're here to change, the people who have been silenced for too long. It's about families torn apart and the incredible power of truth to heal." She paused, feeling the weight of her words, the memories of her own struggles, and the gratitude she felt for everyone who had believed in her, who had helped her transform pain into purpose. Voices of the Innocent exists because no one should have to fight for justice alone. We're here to support, to believe, and to give hope when all hope seems lost. The crowd erupted in applause, and Amanda stepped down, embraced by well-wishers and supporters. The event was a resounding success, and the headquarters stood as a testament to her journey, a monument to resilience, and a promise of hope for others who had suffered under the weight of injustice. The years were kind to Amanda and Emily, yet they brought their own challenges. Emily, now in high school, began to explore her own interests in psychology and social work, inspired by the impact her mother's organization had on people's lives. Amanda watched her daughter flourish, proud of her compassion and determination, grateful that Emily's heart was open and unafraid to help others despite what she had endured. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Emily turned to Amanda with a question that caught her off guard. "Mom," Emily said, her voice quiet but resolute, "do you ever think about what life would have been like if all of that hadn't happened?" Amanda set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables, taking a moment to consider her answer. She had thought about that question herself countless times over the years, wondering what life would have been like if Turner hadn't intervened, if they'd never known the pain they had endured. "I do," she replied softly, meeting Emily's gaze. "I think about it sometimes. And I wonder how different things might have been for us. But I also think about everything we've built because of what happened, all the people we've helped, the lives we've touched. I wouldn't wish what we went through on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade the strength we found in each other for anything." Emily nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "It's strange, isn't it?" she mused. "Something so terrible turned into something good in a way." "Yes," Amanda agreed, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "That's life, I think. It's full of things we can't control, but we have the power to shape what we do with them." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, laughter filling the kitchen as they continued cooking, but Amanda's thoughts lingered on Emily's question. She knew that her daughter would always carry the weight of what had happened, just as she did. But they had learned how to transform that weight into something meaningful, something that could lift others from their own darkness. As the years went on, Voices of the Innocent became a national force for change. Amanda collaborated with lawmakers and advocacy groups, pushing for reforms that would prevent wrongful convictions and hold those in power accountable. She traveled across the country, sharing her story and inspiring others to believe that justice, though often elusive, was a cause worth fighting for. She had been honored by various organizations, her work recognized with awards and accolades. Yet for Amanda, the true reward was in the faces of the people she helped, the families who had been reunited, the individuals who had found new hope because someone had finally listened to them. She often reflected on her journey, realizing that her greatest accomplishment wasn't her success, but her resilience, her ability to turn unimaginable pain into a source of strength for others. One winter evening, Amanda received an unexpected message from Mark. Though their work together had slowed, they had remained friends, often meeting for coffee or exchanging updates on each other's lives. But his message this time was different, carrying a sense of urgency. They met at a small cafe, and as Amanda settled into the booth across from him, she noticed a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Amanda, I've been offered a position as a judge," he said, barely able to contain his enthusiasm. "It's something I never saw coming, but it feels like the right step, a chance to make a real difference from the bench." Amanda's face broke into a wide smile. "Mark, that's incredible. You're going to be amazing," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "I can't think of anyone more deserving." Mark's face softened, and he looked at her with a warmth that went beyond friendship. "I owe a lot of that to you, Amanda. Working on your case changed my life. It showed me what it really means to fight for justice, to believe in something when no one else does. You taught me that." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling between them. In that moment, Amanda realized how far they had both come, how the scars of their past had become the foundations of their futures. They were both moving forward, guided by the experiences that had once nearly broken them, but had ultimately shaped them into the people they were meant to be. Years later, as Emily graduated from college with a degree in social work, Amanda sat in the audience, her heart swelling with pride. She watched her daughter take the stage, her face radiant with accomplishment, her future bright with possibility. The journey they had traveled together had not been easy, but it had forged a bond between them that nothing could ever break. After the ceremony, as they walked through the campus together, Emily turned to her mother with a smile. "I've been thinking, Mom," she said, her voice full of excitement. "I want to work with Voices of the Innocent. I want to be a part of what you've built." Amanda felt a surge of emotion, her heart full of pride and love. "I'd be honored to have you join us, Emily," she replied, her voice thick with feeling. You're the reason I started this journey. You're the reason we've come this far." Together, they walked hand in hand, the sun setting behind them as they looked toward the future. Their journey was one of resilience, of transformation, of finding purpose in the aftermath of tragedy. And though they would carry the memories of their past with them always, they had found a way to turn their pain into a legacy of hope, a beacon for others to follow. Amanda knew that life would continue to bring challenges, that they would face hardships and struggles. But with Emily by her side, she felt ready to face anything. They were more than survivors. They were champions of justice, guardians of hope, and a testament to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. And as they stepped forward together, Amanda felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that their story, once filled with darkness, had become a legacy of light, a legacy that would live on, changing lives, bringing hope, and reminding the world of the power of love and resilience.